question from Benjamin, who says, is just arresting people for saying anti-Semitic things on marches enough to clamp down on this kind of hatred? Should the marches just be banned altogether now? Now, Ben Maguire, I normally always leave the debutant to answer the question last because it's a kind thing to do, but I think this is probably right up your street, and I think you're the only lawyer on the panel.
Yeah, no, I absolutely don't think that protests of this kind should be banned at all. It's a very proud tradition that we have in this country. We pride ourselves on being a democratic country that has free speech. Absolutely vital pillar of that is to allow freedom of expression and freedom of protest. So banning protests, to me and as a Liberal and a Liberal Democrat, is absolutely anathema, and I hope lots of your listeners would be agreeing with me at home, and I certainly know constituents of mine in North Cornwall who I speak to on this are in complete agreement that this is a pillar of our democracy, that freedom of expression, that freedom of protest against our government. That is what this country is built on. That's what this democracy is built on. But obviously, you would caveat that with hate speech. We absolutely condemn any form of hate speech or incitement to violence. That's completely different to freedom of protest, where we're protesting, in this case, against the ban on Palestine action. So of course there's a balance to be had, but am I in favour of a ban on protests of this kind? Absolutely not.
Isn't there a conflict here between freedom of expression and freedom of speech? Because the Metropolitan Police, Greater Manchester Police, they've announced today that anybody who chants globalise the intifada will be arrested. That's an infringement of freedom of speech, isn't it?
Yeah, and I really do feel sorry for the police in these cases because they've got a really difficult job to do. And, you know, we've heard about these chants, often not in English, by the way, so it can be quite hard for the police to always understand exactly what is being chanted as well. So I must say I've got a huge amount of sympathy with the police. But they have a job to do. And as I say, that is getting the balance right.
Well, I believe in freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And of course, throughout our history, people have demonstrated against injustice or things that they don't agree with. And that's part of what makes Britain the free nation that we are. And I defend that. However, there are those who go too far. There are those who overstep the mark. And I worry that the law has not been applied equally to all types of protesters. We're seeing some protesters seemingly get away with vile behaviour and antagonistic behaviour, but others not doing so and being arrested very quickly. So I think the important thing here is to have equality in terms of how the law is applied. And I think there's a lot of questions as to whether that's been happening in terms of the recent demonstrations we've been seeing. I do think that those who are calling for global intifada, well, I think that's worrying. That's inciting potential violence.
I think on a practical level, this worries me. And I think of Palestine Action, prohibiting that particular group, which wasn't attacking, but was prescribed, and it was attacking infrastructure of state, Ministry of Defence, RAF planes, etc., but not individuals. And yet that has seen huge numbers of arrests. And then this judicial quagmire, where to put them. We have a prison system that can't cope. We love, turning fresh cohorts of individuals into criminals, but we don't actually know quite what to do with the criminals because we haven't got the infrastructure to support it. So that's a very practical concern I have. I agree with you, it's utterly unacceptable for any Jewish person in this country or in other Western democracies to feel unsafe, let alone to feel their life is threatened or to see their life taken, which has happened in such a horrific fashion, both here in Britain and now more recently in Australia. I wonder the extent to which outlawing the words global intifada will actually impact on the safety of Jewish communities.
Yeah, I mean, look, global intifada means global uprising. Clearly there is some maybe aggressive, reasonable inferences that you could take from the use of the term. But if you take away one term, the same people will probably replace that with another one we always hear about, from the river to the sea. Many Jewish politicians also use the term. And so I I have mixed views. In fact, I don't have mixed views. I don't think it'd be productive for the term to be banned. And even the head of the campaign against anti-Semitism said it would be a useless measure to ban the term.
You several times talked of double standards with the application of the law. And I wondered what you meant by that, and if you could give me a concrete example.
I think that a lot of people in the Jewish community feel that they are not being given the support and the protection they need, whereby the police are walking on eggshells when it comes to the pro-Palestine protests. Look, the pro-Palestine protests, they've taken over the streets of London weekend after weekend after weekend. Not necessarily every weekend, but constantly. And a lot of Jewish people feel that the law is being applied in not the same way as it should be to all. And we see this in all kinds of areas. So the police do have to ensure that they are neutral. They are not walking on eggshells for certain communities, but not others. The law has to be applied equally to all. And I have to say, some of the laws passed by the Labour government, the previous Labour government, haven't helped. I think that many of the Acts of Parliament passed by Tony Blair have been weaponised.
Just to quickly go to that very big, it captured huge headlines. Do you remember it was on Armistice Saturday, and whether that should be in 2023, shortly after the start of the Gaza-Israel conflict, and there's this mass demonstration in support of those in Gaza. And I went to watch it. I didn't go to join in. I just wanted to see, because it's very difficult. You pick up bits on the news, what the news chooses to relay. You pick up bits on social media. So I went and watched it, and I spoke to extensively the police on the ground. And they said, in relation to where their resources were being pulled, they said it was far more challenging dealing with the counter-protesters who were violently charging at the cenotaph on the same day than it was for this gigantic so-called hate march. So actually, if you've got people walking along chanting unsavoury things versus people who look like they may be threatening, whether it's a famous monument or those around them, where do you put your policing resources?
Well, I think the problem is that some people are protesting constantly. I think that
that's the way of making a point, isn't it?
Look, you can't protest constantly to the exclusion of everybody else. Other people have a protest, and that's it. They don't go back the following weekend and have the same protest again and again and again.
But maybe that's what I did wrong with my Remain marches. Maybe that's
resources are taken out of boroughs like mine to police in London. So we don't get police in Romford because they're policing all these protests in London. That's not fair either. So we don't get police on the streets.
Gently push back on what Andrew's saying about the double standards of Palestine Action, because certainly in my constituency and across Cornwall, we've seen mass arrests of Palestine Action protesters. I'm not quite clear on how the law is being applied unequally there. But in terms of repeat protests, that we shouldn't somehow, I think is what you're saying, be going out and protesting again and again. I'll just gently push back on that. Maybe suggest some lessons from history. Perhaps the suffragettes, I think they maybe protested more than once.
Let's get the perspective of Ajmal Masroor, Imam broadcaster who stood as a pro-Gaza independent in the general election. Ajmal, good to have you on the programme tonight. This latest statement from the police, they are going to take it far more seriously if people chant globalise the intifada. What do you make of it? Is that the right decision?
I don't think it is the right decision, because we need to look at the context as well as the reason why people would make outrageous slogans. I think when you silence people and when you ignore the voices that are calling for justice and fairness for all people, when people are calling for freedom of the Palestinians, for ending the occupation, ending genocide, ending all the horrible atrocities that have been perpetrated against the Palestinians for nearly 100 years, when that's been ignored and inconsistencies are so prevalent in our narratives, people will say all sorts of silly things just to get attention.
You think the situation in Gaza has been ignored?
Yes, pretty badly, including by many media stations.
I think we've discussed it more than any other issue on this show, and probably on LBC collectively in the last 3 years.
I didn't name your station. No, you were quite defensive.
It's been front page news on pretty much every newspaper almost every week over the last 3 years. How has it been ignored?
I think you need to understand the perspective. The reports after reports have found that the media reporting has been biased. Media reporting has been skewed towards supporting one side and ignoring what's happening to the Palestinians. Look, nearly 60,000 Palestinians have been butchered, bombed to bits by the Israeli army. How much of that has been really condemned? And when we have seen Hamas do their terrorist activities, it dominates the conversation. We need to be fair, and I'm very fair here, Ben. I call for justice and fairness for everybody, whether you're Muslim, Jew or Christian, I don't care. They're very upset that none of us are taking it seriously. Britain, who created the mess in the first place by giving away Palestine to a European Zionist movement, a group of people who did not belong to Palestine.
Again, can we focus on that phrase, because that's the subject?
I'm coming to the phrase. I'm saying, why are they saying this? They're saying it because they're angry. They're saying it because they're upset. They're saying it because nobody's listening.
What does that phrase mean to you, Ajmal? Globalise the intifada.
You've just made a very unfair statement, and I need to correct
you. Go on, come back.
The anti-Semitism is a European problem. Palestinians were not anti-Semitic. They lived together for hundreds of years, thousands of years.
Sorry, you don't think Sorry, Ajmal, come on. You don't think the Iranian regime is anti-Semitic?
How long has the Iranian regime been in power? And
but it's not a European problem, is it? It's a global problem.
The Holocaust happened in Europe in the 40s. The Iranians were not involved. In fact, Iranians took the massacred and beleaguered Jewish communities into their own
15 Jews have just been shot dead, Ajmal, 5 days ago in Australia. And you want to tell me it's a European problem?
I have condemned it outright, and I've said 60,000 Palestinians have been killed by the bombs of Israel, as well as, 100,000 Yemenis have been killed, thousands of Sudanese have been killed. My point is very simple, Ben.
What is your...
We have to be consistent in our call for justice.
And I asked you, the question I asked you was, what do you interpret the chant "globalise the intifada" to mean?
I don't understand what that means in reality, because it's a slogan that...
So how can you oppose people being arrested for chanting something that you don't know what it means? Because a lot of people think it means kill Jews across the world.
I'm coming to it very clear. Intifada was glorified, celebrated by our media, our British government, when people like Yasser Arafat was leading it. We were talking about how amazing the Palestinians are for resisting it. Now the very word Intifada is being criminalized. These yo-yo between words that are defined one day and redefined another day, we're confused by this kind of crazy switch between definitions. What I do believe in, and that is, we must end occupation. And when there is an occupied land, people who are occupied have the right to resist. We can't deny them their basic right to resist, basic right to free their land against occupation, against racism, against massacre, against brutality and genocide.
What do you mean by the right to resist? What does that mean in practice?
That they can... So, for example, if somebody... I'll give you a good example. If Scotland decided en masse to make a claim on England and came and occupied your house, my mother and my father and my brothers and sisters are kicked out, you and I would have every right to defend ourselves, to protect my home.
Was the 7th of October defensive? I don't know what you're saying, Ajmal.
1948, 750,000 Palestinians were kicked out of their homes.
That wasn't what I asked.
1967, hundreds and thousands of Palestinians have been massacred. Sabra and Satila. Do you want me to give you a list?
This is where we get. Every single time we try and talk about violent incitement of violence against Jews, people like yourself come on. You say, but what about Gaza? What about Palestine? As if both things can't be true. As if both things can't be true.
I think you're being unfair.
I'm not being unfair. Because you tried to make this entire conversation about the plight of the Palestinian people, which is a very legitimate plight, don't get me wrong. But we are talking this hour about another very legitimate plight, which is the plight of Jewish people who fear for their lives right now because of people walking through the streets of London saying things like globalise the intifada.
Guess what? During the Bondi Beach massacre that happened only the other day, a Muslim risked his life. His name is Ahmed.
Yeah, a hero. Let's talk to Phil Rosenberg about the police decision to crack down hard and arrest people who chant things like globalise the intifada. Phil is the president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Phil, you've been calling for this for some time. Is it too little too late from the police? Evening.
Thank you very much for having me on, Ben. It is too late for Adrian Dalby and Melvin Kravitz, who were murdered at the Heaton Park Synagogue on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year, in October. But it might be the start of pushing back and preventing further atrocities in that vein. Let's remember what the Intifada was. It was attacks on hotels, on restaurants, on buses, suicide bombings, axe attacks. There was a time in Israel where people, when they wanted to go out for dinner, say, which restaurant do we want to die in? Because that was the prevalence of it. And so when people talk about globalising the intifada, they are talking about globalising violent attacks. And when we've seen that happening, we've seen it in Heaton Park in Manchester, we've now seen it in Bondi Beach in Manchester, we've also seen it in Boulder, Colorado, and at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. We have to say, this is unacceptable and we have to clamp down. The police should have clamped down before, but it's right that they're clamping down now. Your previous contributor spoke about the need to be able to campaign for justice and fairness for the Palestinians. I agree with that. People need to be, and I agree. We need to see justice and fairness for the Palestinians. We want to see lasting peace and security for Israelis, Palestinians, and the wider Middle East.
But the current Israeli government feels not doing a very good job of delivering that justice, is it? The current Israeli
violence against civilians.
Fine, we'll talk about that in a moment. But the current Israeli government is not doing a very good job, to put it very mildly, at delivering the justice for the Palestinians that you and I and millions of us want to see. It's going in the opposite direction. It's delivering a lot of injustice in the West Bank and Gaza.
We don't agree with the Israeli government's position on, for example, the two-state solution or what's happening in the West Bank, and some of its ministers, their comments are appalling, and we're clear on that. And I think that that's kind of what we need to see from all parties in this country. We don't want to be importing conflict. We want to be exporting peace. We want to be urging Israelis and Palestinians to do the right thing, to move towards a lasting peace that will end this conflict once and for all. And the problem is, you see people, I think many people of good heart have been on those protests because they wanted to see an end to the fighting.
You don't think they're hate marches?
I think, let me be clear, there are some people on them who are not hateful. They want to see things that we should all want to see, an end to war and a lasting peace. And I can't disagree with that. But there are people on there who have a hateful ideology, a violent ideology. I think you put it very well at the beginning of this programme when you said, there is a ceasefire in place now. What are they still marching for? And what we've seen, particularly since that ceasefire was announced, was these protests have shrunk in size, but the people on them are far, far more extreme. They're calling for much more violent acts, and that is really concerning. And we saw that immediately after the Heaton Park attack. Why were they protesting that evening? The government and police said stop. And they didn't. And that tells you the violent and anti-Semitic intent of some of those people.
They would say, of course, they're still marching today because, yes, a ceasefire is in place just about, but there's still an awful lot of injustice and still a lot of oppression of people in Gaza and the West Bank. Let's just come back to the phrase, though, because... you interpret it in one way, as a lot of people do feel, as an incitement to violence and an incitement perhaps to attack Jewish people, not just Israelis. Other people, including a lot of those who use it, say, no, we don't mean that at all. Intifada just means uprising. We're certainly not calling for violence. So if they don't mean to call for violence, then is it right for the police to arrest them for calling for violence when they say, no, that's not what we're doing at all?
I think it is either disingenuous or very muddled, if I'm generous, to say that it isn't a call for violence. The Intifada in the early 2000s was constant attacks. And they're not saying, they're not saying, by the way, we don't mean any sort of... They know what they're doing. They're calling for violent attacks. And if they're not calling for that, why don't they use another phrase? The person before was talking about justice and fairness. Speak about justice and fairness. I'm not going to call for that to be circumscribed. And by the way, just to be clear, I'm not saying that all protests should be banned. I'm saying that... Sure. There are problems with some of them.
It can't suddenly become illegal. It's either illegal to chant globalise the Intifada, in which case hundreds, maybe thousands of people should have been arrested months and years ago for doing it, or if it's not illegal today, then how can the police suddenly start arresting people? This is what I don't understand. Is it illegal or is it isn't?
The police drew the wrong line previously around this, but I think that out of a sense of wanting to protect free speech and a sense of generosity of heart. But now we see what this means. It is a call, an incitement to violence that has resulted in deadly violence, and it is right that it should have been clamped down on long ago. As I say, it's too late for Adrian Dalby and Melvin Kravitz. But perhaps if we say we are going to insist on a more civil discourse around this, we're going to say yes. You might have different views on this conflict. You might want to see things change. We should all want to see things change.
You can make your point
for violence.
Yes, you can make your point without, even if it is disputed, even if you don't mean to call for violence. If other people interpret your chants as calling for violence, find something else to chant. It's that simple, isn't it?